I was in the backyard when I heard them. I wasn't supposed to be home. My Tuesday afternoon golf league had been cancelled. Something about the course aerating the greens, so they shut down the back nine. My buddy Frank dropped me off at the end of the driveway around 2:30, and I walked around the side of the house because the gate to the backyard was already open, which was strange because I'm particular about that gate. I've been particular about it for 30 years. My wife was standing near the pergola I'd built in 2019. The wood had just started to weather into that silver-gray color I actually liked. She was close to my son's girlfriend. Too close. And it wasn't the closeness that stopped me, it was the sound. Low, almost conspiratorial. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. The kind of quiet that means something is being protected from you. I stood at the corner of the house, hands still on the brick, and I listened. My wife said, "He won't look twice at it. You know how he is." And my son's girlfriend, a woman my son had been seeing for 2 years, a woman who had sat at my Thanksgiving table and complimented my daughter-in-law's sweet potato casserole, said, "Just make sure it's done before the 3rd week of March." I didn't move for a long time. My name is Edward. I'm 67 years old. I worked 31 years in commercial insurance, the kind of work nobody romanticizes but everybody needs. I managed risk for a living, assessed exposure, calculated what could go wrong and how bad it would be when it did. I was good at my job because I was patient and because I did not panic and because I understood that most people tell you exactly who they are if you give them enough time and stay quiet long enough to hear it. I went back around the front of the house. I sat in my truck in the driveway for 22 minutes. Then I called my granddaughter. Let me back up. My son, my only son, 34 years old, had been with this woman for 2 years. She was pleasant enough on the surface, organized, articulate. She worked in property management, which I mention now because it matters later. They'd gotten serious fast, the way people do when they're both past 30 and everyone around them is already married. My wife had taken to her immediately, which at the time I'd thought was a good sign. My wife is not easily impressed, but something had shifted in my house about 8 months ago, and I hadn't been able to name it. My wife started taking more interest in our financial paperwork than she ever had. She'd never been the one to handle the accounts. That was always me. My pension, my IRA, the house we'd paid off in 2021. She started asking questions that felt casual but had edges to them. Where exactly is everything listed? Who's the secondary beneficiary on your life insurance? Does the house go through probate if something happens to you? I told myself she was getting older and just thinking practically. I told myself a lot of things. My granddaughter, my daughter's girl, 22 years old, sharp as a tack and deeply unimpressed by everyone including me, was the one who finally said it out loud. She'd been staying with us for 3 weeks while her apartment was being repainted. She had the bedroom next to the den, and that den shares a thin wall with the kitchen. She heard things. She didn't tell me right away because she wasn't certain, and she's not the kind of kid who throws a grenade before she knows what she's throwing at. She called me when I called her from the driveway. She picked up on the first ring. "I already know," she said. "Know what?" I said, even though I understood. "Grandpa, come to the coffee shop on Marsden Avenue. I'll explain everything. Don't go inside yet." I sat with that for a moment. The garage door was visible from where I was parked. My wife's car was in there. The back gate was still open. "Give me 10 minutes," I said. My granddaughter, I will call her Lily because she's asked me not to use her real name if I ever told this story, had been quietly documenting things for 3 weeks. She's studying accounting. She thinks in patterns, in discrepancies, in things that don't add up. She'd seen my wife on a video call in the kitchen late at night with my son's girlfriend. She'd seen paperwork on the counter that she photographed before my wife shuffled it away. She had the kind of methodical, unhurried mind that I recognized because I had raised her mother. At the coffee shop on Marsden Avenue, she put her phone on the table and slid it toward me. The photographs she'd taken were of a document that appeared to be a quitclaim deed, unsigned but filled in. The property address was our home address. The name being transferred to was not mine. My son's girlfriend owned a property management company. Let me say that again slowly, because I needed someone to say it slowly to me that afternoon. The woman my son was planning to marry managed real estate transactions professionally. She understood deed transfers. She understood how property moved between parties. She understood specifically how an older homeowner could be persuaded or maneuvered into signing something without fully understanding the downstream consequences. And my wife of 38 years, the woman I had driven to every chemotherapy appointment when she was sick in 2017, the woman I had held at 3 in the morning when she was scared. My wife had apparently decided that the house I built was worth more than the life we'd built in it. Lily watched me read the photographs 3 times. She didn't say anything. She's good at that, knowing when to let silence do its work. How long have you known? I finally asked. About the calls, 3 weeks. About what they were actually planning. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. About 10 days. I wanted to be sure. You should have told me sooner. Maybe, she said, but I needed you to have enough information to actually do something. Not just enough to be hurt. She was 22 years old. I want you to understand that. Here is what they appeared to be planning, as best as Lily and I could piece it together over the next several weeks with the help of a real estate attorney named Garrett and my old colleague from the insurance days. A man named Vincent, who now worked in Elder Financial Fraud Consulting. My wife would convince me to do some estate planning. Reasonable, she'd say. We're getting older. The house should be set up properly. In the course of that process, a document would be introduced, perhaps bundled with other paperwork, perhaps presented quickly, the way things are when you trust the person handing you the pen. Once signed, the deed would effectively transfer significant interest in the property. My son's girlfriend would manage the subsequent transaction. My wife would receive a portion of the proceeds. My son, I still don't know how much he knew, and I'm not sure I want to, would benefit by association. Our house had appraised at just over $400,000. We had no mortgage, clear title, paid off years ago. I want to tell you I was furious. I want to say I flipped a table, or raised my voice, or did any of the dramatic things people do in movies when they find out the person they love has been calculating the value of their life. But I'm 67 years old, and I managed risk for 31 years. I did not flip a table. I went home that evening, ate the dinner my wife had made, a chicken piccata I had always loved, and told her about my golf league being cancelled, and listened to her describe a phone call with her sister, and went to bed at 10 o'clock. I stared at the ceiling for a while. Then I started making my own plans. The first call I made the next morning was to Garrett, the real estate attorney. I told him what I'd found, showed him the photograph of the quitclaim draft, and asked him what I could and couldn't do unilaterally. He told me. I listened carefully. The second call was to my bank. I had a joint checking account with my wife and individual accounts from my pension distributions. I made certain changes. I was careful not to do anything that would trigger suspicion or constitute anything improper. Garrett was explicit about that. This was about protecting what was mine, not about retaliation. The third thing I did was contact Vincent. He'd spent 15 years in insurance and the last 6 advising families in situations involving financial elder abuse. He'd seen every variation of this particular story. When I told him mine, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Edward, you're about 6 weeks ahead of where most people are when they call me." That was the first thing in a long time that made me feel like I had any ground under my feet. Here's something I learned. When someone close to you is planning to take something from you, the instinct is to confront them immediately, to demand an explanation, to say what you know and watch them react. I understand that instinct. I have enormous respect for it. But confronting someone before you've protected yourself is like calling the fire department and then lighting the match yourself. You've announced the emergency before you've contained the damage. So I waited. And I watched. And I let my wife continue to bring up estate planning in that casual, reasonable tone she'd been perfecting for months. We should just get everything organized, Eddie. It would give me peace of mind. I would nod and say I'd look into it and then change the subject to whatever was on the news. Lily came and went. We developed a system, she and I. Not elaborate, nothing dramatic. She would send me a text with a certain phrase when she'd noticed something worth knowing. I would call her from my truck, parked down the street. 6 weeks in, my son's girlfriend began to apply gentle pressure directly. She and my son came for dinner on a Sunday, and she mentioned, just in the flow of conversation, that she'd had a client recently, older gentleman, very organized, who'd done a simple deed adjustment to avoid probate. So clean, she said. No court, no fees, everything transfers immediately. She looked at me with what I can only describe as professional warmth. I said that was interesting and asked if anyone wanted more potatoes. My son, for his part, said very little that evening. He helped clear the table, which he doesn't always do. I watched him more carefully than he knew. Lily texted me that night. The phrase we'd agreed on. I called Garrett the next morning and told him to proceed. What Garrett did, what I'd asked him to prepare, was a revocable living trust. My assets, the house, my retirement accounts as appropriate, structured properly, with a trustee arrangement that made any informal deed transfer not just legally ineffective, but immediately flagged. More than that, I'd added a specific provision, one Garrett had suggested and I'd agreed to immediately. Any attempt to have me sign real property documents outside of the established trust framework would trigger an automatic notification to the trustee, who was Vincent. I also recorded a video, sitting at my kitchen table, natural light, no dramatics. I stated my name, the date, my current state of mind, that I was of sound judgment in making these decisions freely. I described, calmly and factually, what I had observed and what I had been told. Garrett had the recording. Vincent had a copy. My daughter, Lily's mother, had a copy I'd mailed to her with a letter she wasn't to open unless something happened to me. Then I waited for them to make their move. They did. About 3 weeks later, my wife sat me down on a weeknight, a Tuesday again. I've started to distrust Tuesdays and said she'd spoken with a colleague of her friend, a woman who specialized in estate planning for couples their age, and she'd like me to come with her to an appointment. Just to listen. Wasn't I always saying we needed to get things in order? I said sure. The appointment was at an office building on the east side of the city, a suite on the 3rd floor. The woman we met, I will call her the consultant, was professional and calm and asked several reasonable questions before sliding a packet of documents across the table. She was very good at her job. She moved through the papers quickly, explaining each one in simple, reassuring terms. The kind of language designed to make you feel like a thorough reading would be an insult to everyone's time. I read every page. On page 7, there it was, a property transfer document framed as part of a joint estate plan. Recipient entity, a property management LLC. I set the page down. I'd like to have my attorney review this before I sign anything, I said. The consultant's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. My wife said, Eddie, it's standard. I'm sure it is, I said. And Garrett will confirm that, and then I'll feel good about signing. Let's set another appointment. We drove home in near silence. That night, my wife made a phone call in the bathroom with the fan running. I didn't listen at the door. I didn't need to. I already knew. 3 days later, I sat my wife down at the kitchen table. I put Garrett's number on the table. I put Vincent's card on the table. I put the photograph Lily had taken of the quitclaim draft on the table, and I put a copy of the trust documents on the table. I said, I know what you've been planning. I need you to understand that it's already done. There's nothing left to transfer. There's nothing left to take. Everything is protected, and the people listed in these documents know exactly what has been happening. She went very still. I said, I am not going to raise my voice. I am not going to make a scene. But I am going to ask you one question, and I need you to answer it honestly. Not for my sake, but for yours, because the answer changes what happens next. She didn't say anything. How long? I asked. She looked at her hands. Then she looked at me. And something in her face shifted. The performance of it, the careful neutrality, and underneath it was something that might have been shame, or might have just been the recognition that it was over. About a year, she said. I sat with that. A year. A year of dinners and Sunday mornings, and her asking how I was feeling and me saying fine. A year. I don't know how to describe what that felt like except to say that it felt like discovering a room in a house you've lived in for 38 years that you never knew existed, and realizing it had always been there, behind a wall, and the wall had felt solid every time you'd passed it. My son's girlfriend was removed from the equation entirely. Whatever my son understood or didn't understand, that is a conversation still in progress, and I will tell you honestly that I don't have a clean answer for how it ends. He is my son. That doesn't change. What changes is what I know about the choices people make when they think no one is watching. My wife moved to her sister's house in early spring. The legal proceedings are ongoing, and Garrett tells me what I need to know when I need to know it. I am not going to pretend the house feels the same. It doesn't. But it is mine, and it is whole, and I know what is in every corner of it. Lily came by last Sunday. She brought coffee from the place on Marsden Avenue. We sat on the back porch, the one with the pergola, and she told me about her semester, and I told her about the garden I was finally getting around to planting. At some point she asked me if I was okay. I thought about it. I will be, I said. She nodded, like that was the exact right answer, and we sat there a little longer while the sun moved through the yard. I spent 31 years assessing risk for a living. I knew that exposure could come from anywhere. I knew that the most dangerous losses were the ones you hadn't anticipated, from the directions you trusted most. I thought I had retired from that kind of vigilance. I hadn't. I just brought it home. I've thought a lot about what I would tell a younger man if he came to me with a story like mine. Not what to do legally, not which attorney to call. Garrett handled that. I mean what to understand about it at the bone level, so it doesn't hollow you out the way it can if you let it. Here's what I landed on. The people who took from me didn't become those people overnight. My wife didn't wake up one Tuesday and decide to become someone unrecognizable. It built slowly, over months, maybe years, out of small choices. A compromise here, a justification there, the gradual convincing of herself that what she wanted was reasonable and what I had was somehow negotiable. That's how it always works. The betrayal isn't one moment. It's 1,000 small ones, each one making the next a little easier. And that matters because it means the answer isn't one moment either. The answer is also built slowly. Out of choices, Lily didn't save me by doing one dramatic thing. She saved me by doing the unglamorous thing, paying attention, being patient, documenting quietly, waiting until she had enough to be useful instead of just enough to be alarmed. She was 22 years old, and she already understood something. It takes most people a lifetime to learn that wisdom isn't about knowing more than everyone else. It's about knowing when to move and when to wait. I spent 31 years in insurance, and I thought I understood risk. What I didn't understand, what I had to learn the hard way, in my own kitchen, staring at photographs my granddaughter had taken on her phone, is that the risk closest to you is the hardest to see. Not because it's hidden, because it's hidden, because it's hidden, because you trust it. The trust is the blind spot. What I'd tell that younger man is this: protect the people in your life who tell you the truth even when it costs them something to do it. Lily didn't have to get involved. She could have stayed out of it, gone back to her apartment, let whatever was going to happen. She chose not to. She chose to sit in that coffee shop on Marsden Avenue and slide her phone across the table and say the hard thing plainly. That kind of loyalty is rare. When you find it, in whatever form it takes, a granddaughter, a friend, a colleague who tells you what you need to hear instead of what's comfortable, treat it like the asset it is. And the people who chose otherwise, I don't carry anger for them anymore. Not because I've forgiven everything. That's a longer road, and I'm honest about where I am on it. But because anger at people who made bad choices out of greed is borrowed weight. It doesn't belong in my house. I've got a garden to finish, and a pergola that needs restaining, and a granddaughter who comes by on Sundays with coffee. The consequences of what they planned fell on them, not because the universe is tidy, but because I did the work to make sure they would. I protected what I'd built. I didn't panic. I didn't announce myself. I moved carefully and I moved in time. That's not luck. That's what happens when you stop assuming the people you love are incapable of hurting you and start paying attention to what's actually in front of you. I wasn't the victim. I made sure of that. And that's the only part of this story I'm proud of.